They say that turning 60 marks the beginning of decline, that we must accept slowness, wrinkles, and silence as signs it's time to step back. But that's a lie told so often it starts to sound true. The reality is that many people, especially women, reach this stage with more clarity, experience, and strength than ever, even though the world still treats them as if they've been left behind. The problem isn't age itself, but how we choose to look at it. The real question is, what happens when you decide to see your life with the same wisdom the ancient Stoics used to see theirs? We've all felt at some point that sense of being unnecessary, of thinking it's too late to start something new, or that opportunities have already closed. But that's not the end. It's the exact point where a new way of living can begin. Stoicism teaches that we are not victims of age, but masters of our attitude toward it. This video isn't a list of motivational quotes. It's a practical guide to reclaim the dignity, energy, and serenity that life may have taken from you at times. Through 9 Stoic truths and one final special lesson, you'll discover that at 60, you're not getting old. You're refining your inner strength. If this is your first time here, my name is Gabriel, and I host this space where philosophy becomes a tool to live with greater peace and purpose. I invite you to subscribe and stay until the end, because there I'll share a nightly Stoic practice that will transform how you close your day and help you sleep with a calm soul. Let's begin. For years, we were taught to fear the passage of time as if it were a sentence, when in truth, it's a measure of the journey, not of loss. We live in a culture that idolizes youth and fears maturity, and that makes us forget that every decade brings a different kind of strength. At 60, it's not about competing with who you once were, but embracing who you are now. Deep down, most of the limitations we blame on age don't come from the body, but from the beliefs we carry without questioning them. Stoic philosophy would put it this way: the obstacle isn't what happens, but how you interpret it. Sometimes what we call decline is simply the absence of purpose. When someone stops feeling they have something to contribute, they fade. But if they change the question from, "What do I have left to lose?" to "What can I still give?" something reignites. The Stoics spoke of the logos, that rational spark that never grows old as long as you keep choosing to think clearly and act with virtue. We've already understood that age isn't a biological limit, but a mental one. And when that illusion collapses, an immense freedom appears, one that many never expected to feel again. I remember a woman I met in a workshop on practical wisdom. She was 70, with completely white hair and a steady voice. She said something I'll never forget. "I'm not old, I'm experienced." She had left a long, painful marriage, moved out on her own, and started painting. She said every brushstroke was a conversation with time, and that for the first time, she felt she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That story wasn't about art. It was about the power of redefining yourself. And that power is available to anyone who dares to question the idea that their time has passed. When you see life through Stoic eyes, you realize that age is just another stage where virtue is still practiced. Seneca said it doesn't matter how many years you live, but how you use them. And there lies the key. Stop viewing age as subtraction and start seeing it as a multiplication of awareness. Have you ever noticed how often you act according to what others expect from someone your age instead of what your heart truly wants? That's the real invisible cage. Behind the idea of "it's too late" lies fear, not truth. Fear of how others see you, fear of not being useful, fear of loneliness. But the Stoic doesn't argue with fears. They observe them, acknowledge them, and keep walking. Because there's no greater freedom than acting despite them. When you choose to take a step outside of what you were told to accept, something within you straightens. You realize it's not about recovering youth, but awakening a strength that only comes with maturity. The secret is understanding that you don't need permission to keep growing. No one but you can declare that a stage of your life is over. At 60, what begins to die isn't the body, but the illusion of control. And when you accept that, a new kind of calm is born, one that doesn't depend on the future or the past, but on your ability to live this moment fully. And from that calm, we can take the next step, understanding how that inner strength is nourished not only by the soul, but also by the body and the mind. Because being unstoppable at 60 isn't just a nice phrase, it's a daily practice. Let's see how. There comes a point in life when the body starts speaking louder than before. It complains, it tires, it demands pauses. Many see this as betrayal, but in truth, it's an invitation. The body doesn't stop being strong at 60. It simply changes how it expresses that strength. Stoic philosophy teaches that true strength isn't about appearance or physical endurance, but about standing firm with serenity in the face of the inevitable. When you understand that, you stop seeing your body as the enemy and start seeing it as an ally. For years, we believed that energy belonged to the young, but Epictetus had already warned, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That phrase takes on new meaning when your bones ache or your knees give out. How you respond to those limits determines whether you give up or adapt. We've already seen that age doesn't stop you. Now, we discover that the body doesn't abandon you. It simply teaches you a new language. That language is listening. Listening to your fatigue, your hunger, your need for rest or movement, and responding with respect, not punishment. I remember a hike in the mountains with a group of older women. One of them, 65 years old, was walking last, taking slow, steady steps. Someone asked if she wanted to rest, and she smiled and said, "No, I've learned that my pace also gets me to the top." That phrase holds all the Stoic wisdom applied to the body. Speed doesn't matter, direction does. And when you stop comparing yourself to who you once were, or to those ahead of you, the body becomes a teacher, not an obstacle. The mind, in turn, needs training, just like muscles do. Stoic practice isn't about denying emotions, but governing them. Training the mind at 60 is more important than ever, because now learning is no longer an obligation, it's a choice. Every day you can exercise attention, calm, and gratitude, the true muscles of the soul. Marcus Aurelius called it training reason, so as not to be a slave to impulse. And that kind of training never expires. But there's a deeper truth. The body ages, the mind matures, and the soul expands. If one of those three falls behind, harmony breaks. That's why balance isn't achieved by repeating positive affirmations, but by observing how you think, how you eat, how you breathe. Stoic wisdom invites you to care for your body as you would for a precious tool, not worshipping or neglecting it, but using it with purpose. Many believe that accepting limits means giving up, but the Stoic knows that acceptance isn't surrender, it's understanding. And when you understand your limits, you can work with them instead of fighting against them. That understanding creates a serene strength, the most powerful of all, because you no longer need to prove anything, you only need to be present. And it's from that presence that the next lesson emerges. Once you accept the strength you still have, you need to direct it toward what you can truly control. Everything else, the inevitable, stops being a burden. In other words, when you stop fighting what isn't yours to change, your energy is freed. Let's see how the Stoics turned that truth into their greatest source of freedom. One of the greatest gifts of turning 60 is clarity. You've seen enough to know that not everything can be changed, and also enough to understand that peace depends less on what happens outside and more on what you choose within. The Stoics called this distinction the invisible wall of the soul. On one side, what you can control, on the other, what you can't. and most suffering comes from trying to climb that wall. Wanting to change other people's opinions, your children's behavior, your aging body, or the past that won't return is like fighting the wind. The only thing you achieve is exhaustion. So far, we've learned that age doesn't limit you and that true strength comes from the balance between body and mind. Now, the third Stoic truth invites you to look your reality straight in the eye and decide where to focus your energy. Every day presents two paths, resisting the inevitable or building what's possible. Both require effort, but only one brings serenity. Marcus Aurelius wrote each night, "God, grant me serenity to accept what I cannot change, courage to change what I can, and wisdom to know the difference." There's no more practical prayer than that. I remember one afternoon when a woman said to me through tears, "I've done everything for my children, and still they drifted away." I asked her, "What depends on you today?" She fell silent, then answered, "The way I keep loving without destroying myself." That was her moment of freedom. She didn't change the story, but she changed her perspective. Sometimes life doesn't ask you to let go of people, but to let go of the expectation that they'll behave as you wish. That's freedom. Stoicism doesn't teach resignation, it teaches the wise use of strength. Picture a storm. You can't stop the rain, but you can open your umbrella, close the windows, and wait calmly. Life works the same way. When you accept that certain things are beyond your control, your soul stops fighting the impossible and begins to blossom through what it can still do. That kind of acceptance isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Acceptance also means observing without judgment. When things don't turn out as you hoped, you can punish yourself or you can learn. Epictetus taught that the wise use setbacks as training. Every disappointment, every loss, every silence from others becomes an opportunity to practice inner mastery. It's not about avoiding pain, but choosing how you move through it. And here lies the most subtle power of this truth, the ability to respond instead of react. When you learn to wait a moment before replying, to breathe before voicing an opinion, or to observe before judging, you begin to regain control over yourself. You don't need the world to be perfect to be at peace. You only need to govern your own mind. This difference between control and acceptance isn't learned once, it's practiced every day. So before we continue, I want to take a moment to invite you to be part of this community dedicated to just that, living with more serenity and purpose. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share your name and country in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from and reading the stories you share. You can also comment about a situation where you had to let go of something you couldn't control. Sometimes your words help others more than you realize. With that said, let's get back to it. Because when you learn to accept what you can't change, you inevitably come face to face with what you can heal, your own past. And there, in that space where guilt and self-criticism often live, Stoicism offers another powerful truth, one that frees and reconciles. There comes a point in life when it no longer makes sense to keep carrying the same guilt. Yet many people, especially in later years, keep replaying old mistakes in their minds as if they could still be fixed. What's interesting is that they don't punish themselves out of malice, but out of misunderstood love. They believe that keeping remorse alive is a way to honor those they once hurt, when in truth, it's a way of continuing to hurt themselves. Stoicism teaches the opposite. The past cannot be changed, but it can be understood, and that understanding is what turns its weight into wisdom. By now, we know that strength lies in accepting reality and not fighting what's beyond your control. Now, this fourth truth invites you to apply that same understanding toward yourself. It's not enough to forgive the world, you also have to learn to forgive yourself. And that perhaps is the most courageous act of maturity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is past is past. What matters is what you do with it now." That phrase captures the essence of inner reconciliation. Stop seeing the past as an enemy and start seeing it as a silent teacher. Years ago, I met a woman who had kept an unsent letter for over 20 years. It was an apology she never dared to deliver. One day, she decided to read it aloud, not to its recipient, but to herself. As she read, she cried, not from pain, but from relief. Later, she told me, "I didn't need him to forgive me. I needed to hear myself forgive me." That moment taught me something profound. Closure doesn't come from the other person. It comes from the inner decision to let go. The Stoics said that guilt only has meaning if it transforms into virtue. Feeling bad about a mistake you can't change doesn't make you better. It makes you less free. True redemption lies in learning and choosing to act differently today. When you give yourself permission to do that, the past stops being a wound and becomes a root, the foundation of wisdom, not its burial ground. Sometimes, making peace with the past means accepting that you were someone who didn't yet know how to be different, that you did the best you could with the level of awareness you had at the time. That acceptance doesn't erase what happened, but it frees you from repeating it. Seneca said, "No one can step into the same river twice," and that applies to our choices as well. You are no longer the person who made those mistakes. You are the one who has understood them. True maturity isn't about collecting years. It's about reconciling stories. When you stop fighting the version of yourself you once were, the present becomes livable. You don't need to erase your past. You need to integrate it. Every experience, even the hardest, becomes part of the map that led you here. And when you look at that map with tenderness, you realize life was never against you. It was always guiding you. This reconciliation brings a different kind of beauty, one that's calm and deep and doesn't depend on the mirror or others' approval. That's why, once you've made peace with your story, the next natural step is to redefine beauty itself. Because when you no longer feel ashamed of what you've lived, every wrinkle and every mark on your body begins to tell a new story. There's a moment, almost imperceptible, when you stop recognizing yourself in the mirror. What you see reflected isn't just the passage of time, but the stories you've lived. And yet, society insists on measuring beauty by what is lost, not by what is gained. What no one tells you is that beauty changes direction with age. It stops coming from the surface and begins to radiate from within. The Stoics understood this well because for them, harmony and virtue were the true forms of grace. Serenity, composure, clarity in the gaze, these don't wrinkle or fade with time. We've already spoken about forgiveness and reconciliation, and it's precisely that process that opens the door to a new kind of presence. When you no longer fight with your past or your body, you begin to inhabit yourself again, and that presence is felt. Beauty, from a Stoic perspective, has nothing to do with youth, but with coherence, when your thoughts, feelings, and actions move in the same direction. Marcus Aurelius said it plainly, "The beauty of the soul shines through the composure of the body." When there's calm within, there's elegance without. Some time ago, a woman told me she had spent years avoiding her own reflection. She said she couldn't bear to see herself old. One day, she decided to do it differently. She looked at herself in silence for several minutes, without judgment. She told me, "For the first time, I saw someone who survived everything." Since then, every morning she greets herself instead of criticizing herself. That simple practice changed her energy, her posture, even the tone of her voice. That's presence, recognizing yourself with gratitude, not disdain. The problem isn't aging, it's believing that beauty has an expiration date. The body changes, of course, but so does your gaze, and with it, the way you move through the world. Serenity has its own aesthetic, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be seen. Those who've learned to listen to themselves project a strength no cream or surgery can imitate. That's the kind of beauty that inspires, not competes. Stoicism teaches that outer order reflects inner order. Taking care of your body, your surroundings, your way of dressing or speaking isn't vanity, it's respect. It's a way of saying, I value my existence. That's why caring for your health, eating well, resting, and moving with intention are acts of self-love, not to stop time, but to honor it. When someone cares for themselves from a place of calm, their energy changes, and others notice it, even if they can't explain why. There's also a kind of humor in maturity that rejuvenates more than any treatment. Being able to laugh at yourself, at your forgetfulness or clumsiness, without bitterness, is another expression of wisdom. Seneca said that nothing beautifies more than a soul that accepts its destiny with a smile. That smile isn't naive. It belongs to someone who's lived enough to stop dramatizing over trivial things. And so, when a woman or a man learns to inhabit their body with gratitude instead of complaint, something powerful happens. Boundaries become clearer. Because inner beauty isn't about pleasing, it knows how to say no without losing calm. That's why the next natural step after reconnecting with your presence is learning to protect it, and that can only be done by setting boundaries, with love and without guilt. There comes an age when patience no longer means putting up with everything. A moment when you finally understand that inner peace doesn't come from being kind to everyone, but from being true to yourself. Setting boundaries doesn't make you harsh or selfish, it makes you free. Yet for many people raised to always take care of others, saying no still feels like a fault. Stoicism, however, teaches that self-control isn't repression, it's protection. And that's one of the noblest forms of self-love, protecting your mind and energy from other people's chaos. So far, we've talked about reconciliation and inner beauty, but none of that lasts if you don't learn to sustain it. Boundaries are the architecture of serenity. Without them, any outside wind can knock you down. Seneca said that those who don't make their own decisions allow others to make them. And that happens more often than we think. When we give in to avoid arguments, when we stay silent out of fear of seeming cold, when we take on burdens that no longer belong to us. Every time you do that, you hand over a piece of your freedom. I recently heard the story of a woman who always said yes to everything her children asked of her. She babysat, cooked, lent money, and listened endlessly to their complaints. Until one day her body said enough, she fell ill. In the hospital, her daughter tearfully asked why she hadn't said no sooner. She replied, "Because I thought love meant having no limits." That simple, heartbreaking sentence reflects the most common mistake in emotional maturity. To love isn't to allow everything, it's to care for what you give. Stoicism offers a different perspective. You can't control what others think of your boundaries, but you can control how you express them. It's not about shouting, it's about speaking with clarity. It's not about distancing yourself from everyone, it's about coming closer to yourself. When you learn to say no calmly, without unnecessary explanations, you discover that most conflicts dissolve on their own. The guilt you feel at first is only the echo of habit, not the voice of your conscience. A boundary isn't a wall, it's a door with a lock. You can open it whenever you choose, but only if the other person enters with respect. That kind of autonomy doesn't happen by chance, it's cultivated. Every time you prioritize your rest, your health, or your peace of mind, you strengthen your ability to decide. And that ability is at the heart of Stoicism, choosing your response, even when the world insists on provoking you. It's also true that setting boundaries creates temporary loneliness. Some people will drift away, and that hurts. But behind that, pain lies something pure, space, space to breathe, to reconnect with yourself, to attract healthier relationships. The guilt begins to fade when you realize your energy is no longer scattered, trying to sustain what was never yours to carry. That's where mature peace is born, the kind that doesn't need anyone's approval. And when that peace takes root, something deeper emerges. You no longer struggle so much with others, but with change itself, with impermanence, with the passage of time, with inevitable loss. That's why the next Stoic truth invites you into even more delicate territory, learning to accept change without fear, and to do it with the serenity that only maturity can teach. As the years pass, life becomes a succession of farewells. Farewells to places, to bodies, to routines, to people who are no longer here, or to versions of ourselves that no longer exist. Feeling nostalgia is natural, but suffering appears when we try to hold on to what is, by nature, meant to change. The Stoics spoke of the flow of things, that inevitable current that carries everything along. Resisting it is like trying to stop the ocean with your hands. Serenity isn't about halting the current, it's about learning to float. So far, we've seen how boundaries protect inner peace, but that peace remains fragile if we don't learn to live alongside change. Epictetus taught that difficulty shows a person who they are. Change does the same. It reveals either our strength or our rigidity. In youth, change feels like opportunity. In maturity, it often feels like loss. But that difference lies not in reality, but in perception. Change isn't always about losing. Sometimes it's about making room for what's next. I like to think of the seasons as a metaphor for life. In spring, everything blooms. In summer, everything burns. In autumn, everything falls. And in winter, everything rests. Yet no season resents the one that follows. At 60, the soul enters its autumn, a time of maturity, harvest, and contemplation. And when you see it through Stoic eyes, autumn isn't an ending, it's a quiet fullness. What you once sought outside, you now begin to find within. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, "Everything you love will someday change, but that's no reason for sadness. It's a reason for gratitude for having had it." That simple line captures the essence of serenity. Accepting change doesn't mean refusing to feel. It means no longer resisting what already is. Maturity brings with it a special kind of freedom, the freedom to choose how to live through the inevitable. And when you learn to do that with calm, even loss becomes a teacher. Recently, a listener wrote to tell me she had lost her partner after 40 years together. She said the hardest part was having breakfast alone. But one morning, she decided to turn it into an act of love. She made her coffee, set flowers on the table, and whispered, "Thank you for these years." Since then, she's repeated that gesture every day. That's serenity, honoring what was without abandoning what is. Serenity doesn't erase pain, it makes it livable. It's the art of accepting that things change while keeping your heart centered. When you reach that state, you realize that nothing external can take your calm away if you've learned how to protect it. And protecting your calm isn't passivity, it's an active form of wisdom. From this understanding arises something powerful. When you stop fighting change, space opens up for something new, something that may have been dormant beneath duties and roles. That space is where purpose is reborn. And that will be our next reflection, how to build meaning when life seems to have redrawn all its maps. There comes a time, usually after 60, when the roles that once defined you begin to dissolve. The children no longer depend on you, work may have ended, routines have changed, and then a deep question arises. Who am I now that I'm no longer needed as before? Many confuse that question with emptiness, but Stoicism sees it as a doorway. Because when the mask of duty falls away, what remains is essence. And that essence can create a new sense of purpose. freer, truer, more real. So far, we've learned to live with change serenely, but serenity becomes fulfillment only when it's filled with meaning. The Stoics believed that every human being has a task, not imposed by others, but dictated by one's own rational nature. Marcus Aurelius called it the work life assigns you. That work isn't always grand. It can be as simple as tending a plant, writing a letter, or listening to someone with attention. What matters is doing it with presence, because purpose doesn't come from the size of the act, but from the intention behind it. I remember a woman I met at a talk on practical philosophy. She was 68 and learning Latin. She told me, "I always wanted to read Seneca in his own language, but life got in the way." When I asked what motivated her, she replied, "I want to understand him through my eyes, not someone else's." That answer captures the spirit of purpose in maturity, doing something simply for the joy of doing it, with no need to prove anything. Purpose isn't always found in great projects. Sometimes it's hidden in everyday gestures. Taking care of your health, organizing your home, reading something that inspires you, offering advice drawn from experience, all of that is purpose when done consciously. The problem is that many people confuse purpose with productivity, and when they can no longer do as much, they think they've lost their worth. But the value of being doesn't depend on doing. The Stoics taught that virtue, living with integrity and tranquility, is a purpose in itself. When someone focuses only on what they've lost, their life contracts. But when they start to see what they can still offer, the horizon expands. That openness isn't fantasy, it's a choice. You can reinvent yourself at 60, 70, or 80, as long as you remember that meaning doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from children, a partner, or society. It's something you build day by day through your choices. There's also a spiritual element in this renewed sense of purpose, not in a religious sense, but in a connection to something greater. The Stoics called it living according to nature, which we might now describe as living in harmony with who you are. When your actions reflect your values, everything regains meaning. And that coherence is the deepest source of peace. Once you recover that center, the world feels less threatening. You're no longer defined by what you do, but by how you live. And from that place of calm and wholeness, another essential Stoic practice arises naturally: gratitude. Because once purpose has taken root, the next step is learning to be grateful, even for what hurts. When life has been lived long enough, gratitude stops being a pretty word and becomes a discipline. In youth, you're grateful for what arrives. In maturity, you learn to be grateful even for what leaves. And that is a higher form of power. The Stoics saw gratitude not as a sentimental gesture, but as a way to keep the mind in order. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every morning upon waking and every night before sleeping, recalling everything that still worked, everything that remained good despite the storms. That practice kept him steady through his hardest days. We've already understood that purpose doesn't depend on roles, but on inner coherence. And it's precisely from that coherence that gratitude is born. Gratitude doesn't mean denying pain. It means recognizing that even within pain, there's something to learn. When you say thank you for something that didn't go as planned, your mind expands and becomes freer. Seneca wrote that one who is grateful does not fear loss, for they have already learned to appreciate. That is the essence of serenity, seeing what endures even amid what changes. A woman once told me that after a complicated surgery, she began writing down 3 things she was grateful for each night. At first, it was hard. She said her list felt small. But as days passed, she began noticing details she'd overlooked before: a talk with her grandson, the taste of her tea, the evening light on her window. My body didn't heal faster, she told me, but my spirit did. Practiced that way, gratitude becomes an invisible medicine. It strengthens the mind and softens the soul. Stoicism teaches that what you think about often becomes your character. If you focus on what's missing, you live in scarcity. If you focus on what's already there, you live in abundance. That mental choice is a daily exercise. You can start with the simplest things, giving thanks for waking up, for having another chance to learn, for an honest conversation, for a body that still carries you. Every conscious act of gratitude is a way to reclaim your power over discouragement. There's also a quieter kind of gratitude, the one not spoken aloud. It's looking at your story and acknowledging that even though there were wounds, there was also beauty. That if something hurt, it's because it once mattered. That deep gratitude doesn't seek comfort, it seeks understanding. It reconciles you with the path you've walked and prepares you to move more lightly through what's to come. And there's a moment when you give thanks with that kind of awareness, when fear dissolves, because you realize that nothing can take away what you've already learned. That certainty makes you unshakable. Gratitude isn't naive, it's defiant. It's looking life straight in the eye and saying, "Still thank you." From that state of serene gratitude, the ancient Stoics would end their day with a simple nightly ritual, a way to keep the mind calm and the heart at peace, no matter how the day had gone. That practice is the 10th truth of this journey and the reward for those who've come this far. Now let's open that final door. Every day leaves traces, conversations that moved you, decisions that weighed on you, thoughts that kept circling in your mind. If you don't sort them out, they pile up like dust on the soul. The Stoics knew that serenity isn't built through grand ideas alone, but through small habits that cleanse the mind each day. That's why they practiced a nightly ritual as simple as it was powerful, reviewing the day before going to sleep. Marcus Aurelius did it in his journal, Seneca recommended it to his students, and Epictetus considered it a duty of the soul. They didn't need temples or teachers, only honesty. The ritual has 3 questions, so clear they seem obvious, yet so deep they can change your life. What did I do well today? What did I do wrong? What can I do better tomorrow? That trio was their way of ending the day with awareness and beginning the next with direction. The goal wasn't to judge, but to observe with clarity, to give thanks for what went well, acknowledge what didn't without drama, and set an intention to improve. It's an exercise in humility and power at once. Humility to accept, power to choose differently. I remember trying this ritual years ago, during a time when my mind felt overwhelmed by noise. Each night, I wrote my answers in a notebook. At first, it felt like just another task, but over time it became a necessity. I discovered that when you calmly review your day, your thoughts begin to arrange themselves. You start sleeping more lightly because your mind knows it's done its work. It's a way of forgiving yourself and preparing yourself at the same time. What's most surprising is how your perspective shifts with time. Writing down what you did well teaches you to recognize your own effort, something we often forget. Writing what you did wrong humanizes you, reminding you that mistakes don't take away your worth. And writing what you can improve keeps you moving forward, even when the body slows down. Each night, you move a little closer to serenity, not by forcing it, but by observing yourself truthfully. Practice consistently. This habit becomes a refuge. You don't need much, just paper, a pen, and a few minutes of quiet. Do it before bed, free from distractions. If you're tired one night, answer mentally. What matters isn't perfection, but presence. The Stoics understood that those who know themselves find calm, and those who are calm govern their lives. In the end, this ritual isn't just about reviewing the day, it's about making peace with it. It reminds you that you can always begin again, even each night. And when you turn off the light, you carry one simple truth with you. Peace doesn't come from having everything figured out, but from being at peace with what you did, with what you learned, and with your willingness to keep growing. And that's how this journey through Stoic truths comes to a close. But the path doesn't end here, because living with serenity isn't a destination, it's a practice, and every sunrise will offer you a new chance to begin again, with more calm, more clarity, and more power over yourself. Reaching this point hasn't been about listening to a simple collection of ideas, but about walking an inner path. We began by dismantling the belief that age is a limit, and ended by discovering that it is, in fact, the very point where true freedom begins. Along the way, we've seen that strength doesn't lie in denying the passage of time, but in inhabiting it with dignity. That the mistakes of the past don't define the future. And that every day remains an opportunity to learn, to care, to give thanks. If there's one thing to take from this journey, let it be the certainty that serenity is neither inherited nor bought. It's practiced, step by step, as an art of living. I'm deeply grateful that you've made it this far. Choosing calm in a world that pushes noise and choosing reflection in an age that never stops running is no small act. Thank you for staying, for listening, for allowing these words to be part of your night, your silence, your search. Each person who arrives here helps sustain a space where it's still possible to speak with depth, without masks or haste, and that, in itself, is already a form of community. My name is Gabriel, and I host this space with the purpose of sharing practical wisdom that helps us live with dignity and peace, even when others don't change. That's the essence of this path, learning to protect who you are without hardening, and to love without losing yourself. If something you heard today resonated with you, then you've already taken a step toward the serenity you seek. Before you go, I invite you to leave a comment with the country you're listening from and write this phrase to seal what you've learned. I am the master of my destiny. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, a friend, a sister, or a mother who still doesn't realize how strong she is. Thank you for being part of this community that grows through awareness and calm. On the screen, you'll see 2 videos that can continue this journey. Choose the one that speaks most to you and keep deepening this path of wisdom, freedom, and serenity. May your night be peaceful, your mind at ease, and each sunrise find you a little more at home within yourself.